What's up to the three sweaty Polynesian dudes who are probably listening to this podcast right now? This is the first installment of the Three Empires, and we're talking gun control, because none of you idiots can seem to get it right. Strap on in, let's get this shit started.
You are now entering the Three Empires, by far the most dastardly and majestic political system of our time. Be warned, proceed with caution.
So, BuzzFeed Blue.
Precursor, this is a podcast on gun control, but BuzzFeed once again has provided us with some fucking disgusting subhuman garbage, so...
It really is one of the most deplorable representations of a historical figure. They have this segment called Assassinating History or some ridiculous bullshit like that, where they discuss specifically one specific topic or one specific person throughout history. And for this particular segment, they had a panel of 4 or 5 douches sitting in like a fucking Last Supper-like table facing a camera, and they're talking about Darius the Great, the first of Persia. And of course they begin by saying, Darius? That's like a modern name. I know like 7 Dariuses. I'm like, oh, you fucking idiot. Yeah, because all of the Dariuses you know clearly originated with that name. Obviously, you fucking... Anyway, so that was the first, like, okay, what's going on here? This is clearly not what I thought this was going to be.
It's like, wow, oh my god, a modern name was once, a historical figure once had a name that's now popular, like, Jesus.
Anyway, so that's the way it began. I was quite... skeptical to see how the rest of the segment was going to go on until they started talking about, for all intents and purposes, a very watered down, very anachronistic, uncivilized display of what the Persian Empire was under Cyrus the Great, and how apparently, according to legend, Cyrus saw Darius, who was by no means related to him. I suppose there must have been some sort of nobility connection.
Yeah, Darius was a noble.
Yeah, but and how Cyrus the Great saw that Darius would one day essentially encompass what was the Persian Empire through some sort of vision. And how he was afraid of this because what he saw was Darius spreading his wings over both corners of the empire, or something of the sort. And of course they were laughing their asses off, calling it like... It infuriated me because I know this is coming straight from Herodotus, and I know none of this has any factual ramification whatsoever. But of course, for them, they're not really doing a proper historical analysis. They're just going to read whatever they can find on any nonsense they can find. And I looked up what they were referring to. It's only on Wikipedia. Literally, it's only there with no real attached source to it. Yeah.
Yeah, like at the end of the day, you can make something factually honest and still entertaining, history-wise, But, I mean, what the fuck do you expect from BuzzFeed, the most tabloidy, trashy site on the internet?
It just bothers me how they have the audacity, these individuals who I would imagine, I haven't done any research on any of them, but I would imagine none of them have any real historical credibility.
Oh, no, of course not. And, I mean...
And they're trying to turn tabloid through history and make it about it. And it boggles my mind.
If they don't give any proper respect to, modern day topics that, actually affect people's perception of the world in the here and the now, what makes you think they'd have any more integrity, when talking about something that happened thousands of years ago?
It's just unfortunate because this is supposed to be their attempt at trying to tackle academics to some degree. And this is the way that they begin.
And that's a big problem with what I have, at least, with how history is discussed in kind of the mainstream news sources. It's either like, oh, here's an interesting little isolated tidbit, you know what I mean? Or like, I don't know, here's a little throwaway comment, or hey, let's study the exact same 5 things over and over again. And every time I hear history repeats itself, I want to fucking stab myself in the eye with a Phillips screwdriver. Like, it's the same cliches over and over again.
It's just
it's interesting
broad,
shit. Yeah, it doesn't have to be dry and academic or, tabloidy and false.
It definitely doesn't have to.
You can have something in
not.
between. You know what I mean?
See, there is this talking about great YouTube channels and how they turn history into something that can be both a form of entertainment and educational. There's these fellows that I showed you, extra credits. These guys take historical segments and periods throughout history and scenes throughout history, and they turn it into sort of like a moving comic strip that you're seeing panel by panel through their video.
Yeah.
And it's brilliant. It is fantastic. It is well thought out, and more importantly, it's accurate to the point that they're able to tell a narrative without necessarily diving into the nuances of each individual subject.
And I feel like there's a lot of new, there's a lot of channels out like that are, gaining more attention today. Dan Carlin's Hardcore History is another one that comes to mind. History on Fire, Daniele Bolelli. Like these are good channels, and like, fuck, you want to learn about. You want great stories. Everyone's interested in great stories.
100%.
At the same time, you want to learn more about the world and where we came from, and how we got here, and have a little more context to your worldview. Who the fuck wouldn't want that?
Exactly.
But it's just amazing to me that people have either been able to suck the fun out of it, and in other cases, just suck the facts out of it. Like
either way, something dire is missing in that equation, and that is where really people suffer because they're getting their facts, or more appropriately, their factoids, from these just bumbling oafs. And it's really unfortunate that these are their primary, or rather, their primary source of entertainment through history.
Yeah, and that's history is and can be entertainment and education at the same time. And where I feel like it's it's necessary for people to come in that are entertaining and well researched is the normal people. They're not going to fucking read some academic paper.
Of course not.
And at the same time, they're not going to check a 2-minute video to see if the information they've just watched is accurately sourced. It's just not feasible, you know? It's, so if you have people that are entertaining, but they do the fucking, the hard work on the back end to research and make sure their information's credible, you're doing a fucking service to the public, in my view.
Precisely.
Not to jerk myself off under the table too much, but,
Well, here's the thing. Most people who make what we're trying to do here, trying to make history a form of entertainment, we're not necessarily doing this for the sake of purely entertainment. And I don't think anybody really does that. It's because the people who do it genuinely have a passion for this subject matter. Yeah. And they want to express what they know and how they know it to others.
For sure. And one thing that I've seen, like, if you don't think that people have an agenda, even if they're presenting these tabloidy things, you think those cuckle fucks down at BuzzFeed aren't trying to push an agenda by sure presenting this? Obviously, it's they're trying to present a particular worldview. So let's talk about gun control. Let's dive into this motherfucker.
That. Let me bring up my notes.
So where I kind of wanted to start on this, which from the historical gun control debate, is back at the Second Amendment. And one thing that I found kind of interesting about this is the militia clause within the Second Amendment. Mm-hmm. Now, whenever I've heard the militia clause brought up, it's generally been brought up by more liberal-minded people who are in favor of gun control, who are like, well, the Second Amendment it's not about gun control. It's not about giving freedom to possess guns to everybody. It's about giving militias the freedom to possess guns. Now, after looking into this, one thing that kind of struck me, that kind of changed my perception a little bit on the Second Amendment and gun control, is that the militia argument is actually invalid in that regard. So what I found is that the militia argument is a way of not just arming people, right? It's a way of arming and organizing them. So if anything, it's more in favor of the armament of people, right? Because if you look at the big disparities that are, if we were to look at in our society, of a balance of power between state and just the individual person. One is obviously the size of the gun that they hold, but the other one is organization, right? So you're allowing people the ability to organize as a counterbalance to government, and I found that pretty interesting.
Generally, sure, that is an interesting point, but from the very inception of the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution, it was specifically for the purpose of ensuring that should the government ever become tyrannical, this was their method. This was their fail-safe, if you would.
Yeah.
To ensure that the government cannot wholeheartedly, or rather wholesale, take over the people of the United States or the geographical location of the United States unopposed. And this was the main function of the Second Amendment, to ensure that people are armed. But I think the language, or at least to some, is rather clear on the subject that the armed people must be at least partially regulated.
Yeah, a well-armed and regulated militia being, I'm obviously going to misquote it here, but essential to the, the liberty of the people of the United States. And it's interesting because this amendment was kind of framed in a time where these disarmaments of the people were real, right?
Yeah.
Like these were very real concerns. So one of the things I found, I'm just going to pull up the exact historical figure here so I don't get. Okay, who the fuck was it that tried to disarm people in the in England? It was in the English Bill of Rights, 1689. King. Whatever. Okay, King James, yeah, last Catholic, one of the last Catholic monarchs in England, and he actually tried to disarm the people and institute a couple of laws that were, would really tilt the balance of power in the government's favor, as opposed to the ordinary citizen. Also, you got to look at this as a Catholic king ruling over a Protestant population that's looking for any excuse to oust him. So, I framed around the same time, and like when the founding fathers are kind of writing the Second Amendment, they're obviously taking these things into consideration, right? They're taking into consideration these disarmaments that have happened in England. They're taking into consideration the landed aristocracies of Europe, the tyranny of kings. So, yeah.
They're largely concerned of tyranny in any sense of the word, but what the specific kind of tyranny that they have in mind is, of course, monarchy. The founding fathers, every single one of them, fought with almost everything that they had in order to rid themselves of monarchs, save for the loyalists that did exist in the continent, of which there are many, in both halves of the continent. Regardless, though, they needed to understand that form of warfare would evolve in a way that none of them would have ever imagined. They had no idea that, I would imagine, that they would have had no idea the kind of armaments that could be introduced into the world just by simple technological advancement.
Absolutely.
How war can evolve and how the Second Amendment becomes even more of a dinosaur by comparison.
Yeah.
How is it that a well-regulated militia could conceivably defend itself against the tyrannical government in the United States in its present day?
It can't. And here's the thing, even back in the day, it couldn't either. So militias were proven throughout history to be incredibly unsuccessful, right? Not only in upkeeping the militia, getting people to join the militia, they proved very unpopular in that I think it was like a significant amount of people who were supposed to sign up for the militia just didn't, for one reason or another. And when these militias were tested in combat, in let's say suppressing the Pennsylvania Farmers Rebellion, right? They failed. They had to rely on the central government in order to suppress that. Or in the War of 1812, like Canada burned down the White House. Who do you blame for that? You've got to blame militias that didn't oversee those operations properly. So again and again, the militias were tried and tested, and now we're in a context today where organization, huge technological advantage, logistics, intelligence is all on the government side. If you want to rebel against a tyrannical government, today it's either all in or all out, and you better have a damn good shot of doing it, because otherwise you're going to be crushed. Force is just not a good way of ensuring liberty, and the balance is just so far tilted in the government side that, yeah.
But unfortunately, I don't think, regardless of these arguments, that any of it really matters, because when it comes down to it, at least in my humble opinion, the United States' culture is fundamentally built on conflict and especially warfare, and owning weapons of these ridiculous degrees and of the vast numbers of people who do indeed own war-capable weapons. It really is a part of their culture. Mm-hmm. And it really comes down to when it was introduced to them at the very inception of European colonization. From the very beginning, such as the 7 Years' War and all the other conflicts preceding it, this is where the United States and its people were very much introduced to this new level of conflict, and something that has persisted throughout their entire history. War has been part of the American culture before America even existed.
Yep.
And this is something that is reflected in their collective consciousness.
It's a frontier nation. Yeah.
Exactly.
Every inch of land that the Americans got was either received through treaties or warfare, essentially, right? This was a continent that was, settled forcibly by European powers. So yeah, that's going to be imprinted in the collective consciousness of the American people, and that's kind of one of the problems I have with, some kind of a mass roundup of arms, or when we get into a modern context, because what a lot of people don't understand is there's no one perfect system of gun control, right? There really isn't.
I suppose not, but there must be some examples. I mean, Australia and Japan, Canada even, are prime examples for gun control, bringing their numbers to almost zero, which is remarkable by itself.
Okay, so you brought up three very separate examples, right? Canada is actually a lot more permissive than the two. We have our gun regulation is based on a shall issue basis. So a shall issue basis is there's gun control, but it's fairly permissive, from my understanding of it. Japan would be the strictest out of the three, except under very, very specific circumstances. You are not getting a sword or a gun in Japan. It's not going to happen. Australia, there's certain examples where you're allowed hunting rifles, but automatic weapons are banned, I believe. So again, 3 different levels of gun control, 3 different cultural contexts, right? Yeah, and I think the level of gun control you need is going to be framed within that cultural context, right? So somewhere like Switzerland that has more permissive gun laws than other places, but it works for them, right?
Well, of course. See, it works for Switzerland because Switzerland is, in almost every way that matters, not the United States. It has very different viewpoints on what needs, or what rather a society needs, rather than the United States does.
Exactly.
And these are the two things that really, again, in my humble opinion, propagate gun violence. In the United States, as compared to Switzerland, and we're only talking in this context, the United States population, by comparison, of course, in comparison through numbers, has a very, very much higher population of rather mid to uneducated people. As opposed to Switzerland, who has its entire country is built around just educating its people to a very high degree. And you have these two different kinds of people. You have, not the kinds of people, I think that's an inaccurate statement. You have these two different systems of government and societal norms. And yet you have, as you said, permissible gun laws. What is the equation supposed to reflect in given these two circumstances? One has far more gun violence than the other. Perhaps the most gun violence of anywhere else on the planet. And the numbers simply speak for themselves.
Yeah, there is now anywhere on the planet we can Google that but that's where they fall on gun violence. But yeah, I'm so given those like very important factors that you brought up, that the United States and Switzerland have two very disparate cultures. Is there some kind of baseline for gun control that should be universally agreed upon? Where do we draw the line? Where do we say, this is the absolute minimum that a society should and needs to have, right?
Well,
because we've seen successful models of gun control that are more permissive than others, and less permissive than others. Japan obviously is a successful model. There's the only times you're allowed to access a gun in Japan, I think, is if you're going hunting, and the gun has to be locked up at a local police station.
And also interesting that the individuals who own firearms in Japan are every 3 months, every 4 months, they're checked upon for the psychological. It's sort of like a psychological evaluation.
Yeah.
Every 4 months or so, to make sure that they're still able to carry their firearms or keep them in their homes.
Now, that being obviously one of the more extreme examples I could find, at least for if you wanted a country that said no guns, none, zero, that's it. But we find successful examples that are more permissive, like Canada. It's not that hard to get a gun here in Canada.
No. But we require a license.
We require a license.
There is a hunting license that is required to own firearms in Canada.
So,
something that is not necessarily the United States, or at least not all of the United States. There are certain states that require licenses.
It varies so much, so it's kind of hard for us to make generalizations. But
and talking about the variety, sorry to interrupt you, but talking about the variety in the United States, this is again part of their social, collective consciousness, because ever since the Articles of Confederation, the states have very much behaved and acted very independently of one another. It wasn't until they were all forced to a table that this Constitution was first drawn up that they were more or less expected to follow the exact same principles of government.
Well, and they still don't. Like the difference for someone. I think the states' rights is one of the few things it's the gel that's keeping the states together, because they have just from a value perspective, right? If you compare California and Arkansas, you're looking at two different fucking worlds. For a couple of Canucks like us, it's ridiculous. Wait, you can be in New York with the third highest amount of executions, capital punishments in the entire United States, and then you cross an arbitrary line and I can't be executed? It's to a Canadian, it's preposterous, because we're pretty much all on board. Our political spectrum isn't the difference between our most conservative and most liberal party is not. It's not that disparate that they can't come together on certain issues.
No, not even remotely. See, our Republican example, our very conservative example, is nowhere near as conservative as it gets in the United States.
Our most conservative major political party, guess what? They're in favor of gay marriage.
Exactly.
And guess what? Abortion. And what else? Soon they're going to have to be in favor of legal weed.
Yes.
So I'd like to bring it back to that question, because I'm really curious. This is one of the things that, at least a question I couldn't answer in the research alone is, what is the baseline of gun control that we need? So when the most ardent NRA supporters are like, there's no fucking difference. There's no difference between weapons. They all kill people. We should be allowed to have any possible weapon we can. It's like, okay, so we should all have a nuke, right? Let's all give someone a little red button and you press it and it destroys the fucking world.
It's just, I can't.
So obviously, even the most ardent NRA supporter wouldn't be in favor of that, right? Because, while most people would behave responsibly from the nukes, maybe someone would fly off the handle. Maybe you get a crazy person who that would get access to the nuke. And the issue here isn't necessarily, the vast majority of people and what they would do. It's what happens when you put very deadly things into the hands of crazy people. So what, in your opinion, is the baseline that we need?
I've often contemplated the mindset that many of these people take for the defense of owning guns. And what I've really come down to is not necessarily the rhetoric.
I gotta pee again. I gotta pause you. We're gonna take a brief commercial break.
We'll be right back.
And we're back. So yeah. That's what happens when you drink too much fucking coffee and water. So
I forgive you.
So baseline for gun control. What do you think?
What I was saying before, I was trying to enter the mindset of these people who are very pro-gun, very pro-non-regulation for their firearms. And what it really came down to, what I was trying to really tap into, was just how much they love their toys. And that's great. Honestly, I can relate. Mm-hmm. I love swords. I've collected a great deal of swords. Not a great deal, like some people collect their guns, of course not. And I really do understand that these are things that you want to own for the sake of protection, for the sake of any conceivable number of things. That's fine. But it really comes down to, why do you really want these things? If it was really all about protection, one or two of them would suffice. You don't need a fucking artillery.
You don't need an arsenal.
You do not need anything remotely capable of continuing any sort of mass-scale warfare if you need it. So when it comes to answering your question, I think there has to be a limit as to how many firearms an individual can possess.
Okay, so you're talking more limit of number of firearms.
Yeah. See, if you want to own your guns, fine. Don't own so many of them, though. And by all means, don't own so much ammunition. There has to be a number, not a set number, as to not only how many firearms you can own, but how much ammunition you're allowed to have.
So it's interesting. Interesting you'd bring that up. So in my research, I actually found Italy has kind of a solution for that. So the limit is 7 guns, I believe. It's 7 or 8. If you want to go above that, you need a collector's license, right? And that I think makes sense. You want to apply it, you want more guns? Okay, we just need to make sure that you're not making a fucking arsenal. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And that you're not selling them.
Yeah.
More to the point, because you could be selling them to anybody.
And I think that's fair. I think that's fair. I think people should be entitled to own their toys.
Of course,
I think so.
yes, by all means. People own hundreds of cars or whatever. Like, fine. You want to own guns, by all means. You're not hurting anybody.
Yeah,
so long as there's a limit as to how many you can buy.
Cars are dangerous. Cars are
extremely
definitely
dangerous,
dangerous.
yeah.
I could drive into traffic. I could drive into oncoming traffic.
You could drive through a York picket fence. You were just talking to me about that.
Yeah. Jesus, we're at York University and there's these fucking protesters. And
That's a discussion for a different day.
yeah, there's flashes where you just want to step on the gas. And
100%. And yeah, you're only human. But here's the thing, though. One thing is a car, a mode of transportation that has a variety of different purposes. A gun is a gun. Its purpose is designed for killing.
well, this is going to be unpopular, but I also think we need stricter regulation for who drives and who doesn't, because there's some fucking idiots on the road.
Sure, yeah.
And there's 40,000 deaths by automobile a year in the United States that we just write off as,
Oh, yeah.
you know,
Oh, yeah.
it's like, oh, whatever.
But even
40,000 dead, no big deal. It's a part of our daily, you know what I mean? Obviously, the act of someone running into an elementary school and shooting it up is so much more extreme that it garners more attention, and I think in some cases justifiably so.
Very much so. Because see, for as far as cars go and car-related homicides, you have people who are specifically targeting a group of people in the most extreme circumstances.
And that happens.
And that does happen, 100%.
We saw it in France.
Yeah, but there's just something so much more extreme about going to anywhere, whether it be a school, whether it be a place of worship, whether it be anything, and just blowing everyone away with nothing but whatever firearm you're carrying at the moment, for the sake of causing as many casualties as possible. It's grotesque. It's amazing how the United States can still be having this discussion and still not really find a viable answer because of all these lobbyists that are still in the pockets of the NRA.
Now, while we're still on this, I think I came up with a bit of a... I'm here to fix the world. I came up with a solution.
Oh my God, he has the answer. After all this time, the Savior has come.
I'm ready. Are you ready for this?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
Brace yourself.
Oh boy.
So I don't hear anybody talking about this. Whenever a fucking school shooting, and I'm going to go on a bit of a rant here. Whenever a fucking school shooting comes around, every single time we hear the exact same talk.
Oh, yeah.
The right is, no, okay, the left first is, we need to take away every single gun and just hold hands and throw boxes of chocolate at the shooters, and it's terrible, take everyone's guns. And then the right just like, there's no way you're gonna take my fucking guns. 1776. The South will rise again. Like, and
guns don't kill people. People with guns kill people. Oh my God.
now, there's truth in both points, but I have found no nuance to the discussion whatsoever. The right will bring up a good counter-argument to the left that this isn't a gun problem, it's a mental health issue. Granted, I agree.
Yes, of course.
Now,
but
what are you going to fucking do about it? Now, the big solution, and this is a very multidimensional problem. Do we have a problem with crazy people getting guns? Yes. Do we have a problem with crazy people? Fuck
Yes.
yeah. Do we have a problem with, children being undefended at school? Sure. So the big solution I've seen now, which we can get into in more detail, is put a cop or an off-duty police officer or a retired police officer at the school. Now, it could be a good idea, it could be a bad idea. We can delve into that a little more later. But I've got a better solution, because that's a Band-Aid solution, right? You're not solving the issue of why you have school shooters. You're just posting someone there that's going to shoot a school shooter when they do come. You're waiting for that to happen. Why not give these teachers, or another solution, arming the teachers. Brilliant, great solution. Give fucking Dolores the school lunch lady and fucking Mrs. Pennyworth,
Oh, you're being sarcastic. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, you got me concerned there. Like, this is your grand solution.
So-
the president has already brought it up, buddy.
My grand solution, because the way that I view schools, and I'm going to go a little personally into my experience, we're lacking a sense of community in our society. We're lacking a sense of closeness, right?
Perhaps.
Our kids are spending, 90% of their time at schools, right? And time again, these school shooters fly under the radar. You know, some poor loner kid who comes to school day in and day out and he's bullied, and maybe he's got a terrible home situation. And these people are, you know, the quote unquote losers of society. So why not staff some more counselors and psychologists at schools? Why not give teachers a little more, instead of giving them handguns, give them training in psychology so that they can recognize this and so that we can become a little more empathetic as a society?
Easy, you're starting to sound like a commie.
Maybe I should be speaking like Gandhi while I'm saying this.
Yes.
But
Honestly, Sweden has been doing this in their country for decades now. And the United States knows about these models. Many very educated people who are fully aware of what you're saying. This is definitely something that they're trying to push for, but this is alien territory for the majority of the people.
It's not a popular solution though, because it's not sexy,
no,
and it's long term.
It's un-American. And that's exactly what we're trying to get at here. See, the American model, the American-ism here, is that bigger is better. And this is not a big solution. This is a micro solution that will definitely resolve the macro problem. And that's exactly what they don't want to hear. They want a big, flashy solution. As you said, a sexy solution to it.
And I think a big problem with that is that the American political system operates within term limits of precedence.
100%.
If you implement this long-term strategy, your fucking successor is going to take credit for it. But you know what? You're going to fix the fucking country. And that's one of the problems with democracy. But, yeah, it's solutions like this that we need. That's attacking the solution at the root of problem. The fact that our societies have no community anymore, no closeness, you know, you don't have the same... I guess, yeah, community is the word that I'm looking for. That's largely evaporated.
Strengthening one's community does solve a great deal of problems, and especially when it comes to such systemic violence throughout the populace of a country.
Exactly.
It really is the only viable solution, or at least one of the many viable solutions. And I don't know, as brilliant of an idea as it is, it has been implemented elsewhere with varying degrees of success. But in the United States, I don't think they're culturally ready for something so, I don't know, infinitesimal.
You know, here's where I disagree with you, because the United States as a whole, yes, I agree with you. There's no way you're going to get the federal government to pass this. It's not going to happen. But this is why I said before that I think that states' rights is the glue that's holding the United States together right now. You could implement it on a statewide level. Perhaps California or New York or, you know, Oregon adopts this. And we see the tangible benefits of it. And results speak. They're undeniable. You implement this on a state level, right? And you see that schools are happier, grades are up. A solution like this isn't something that just fixes the problem of school shooters, right? It fixes the broken fucking education system that's pumping out, you know, drones and, you know, unhappy, directionless people. You see the results in not just one thing, like, hey, we fixed the education system. We brought a sense of community. That's going to be undeniable, right? And then other states are going to adopt it. How the fuck are you going to argue with results when that happens? So as far as the federal government is this big monolith, you know, that's going to implement some top-down policy, it's always going to be resisted. But maybe there's some hope on a state level.
It can work, but of course, the various obstacles exist, and this particular obstacle is in the shape of the NRA. And this particular behemoth is not an easy dragon to take down.
Well, the NRA should be in support of the solution, though, because it's not, you know, we're not taking away access to their toys.
No.
By the way,
exactly
the NRA sued Florida. They sued Florida for implementing legislation after the school shooting that says that you can't own a semi-automatic weapon if you're under 21. They sued fucking Florida. Can you believe that?
No, I can't. Actually, I can absolutely believe it. See, here's the problem. The NRA loves this. They want this kind of shit to happen because it opens up this discussion and ultimately gives more people, especially the very uneducated, the incentive to buy their products, which is for all intents and purposes, every single gun in existence in the United States.
Wait, buy their products? I don't think the NRA sells. Do they sell?
Well, not literally. I'm speaking figuratively.
Oh, buy their intellectual product.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
They want people, especially for this particular reason, to continue to own firearms and this discussion to continue going nowhere. They thrive on this type of negativity, and this is exactly
and the fucking gridlock and sorry, I misspoke. I just wanted to get that correctly. It's not just semi-automatic weapons. It's raising the age of owning a weapon from 18 to 21.
Oh, so in general,
any weapon.
Fantastic.
Boo fucking who? I can't drink till I'm 21. I don't think I should be able to own a gun either.
It really does speak volumes about a society that allows 18-year-olds to be in porn, but can't allow them to drink, vote, or really do anything of any significance.
Oops. 16 years old, you're eligible for the draft. But so I heard, and this will bring us a little bit back to the historical angle. Mm-hmm. I heard an interesting argument that a good friend of mine brought up, and that was gun ownership is a constitutional right. And
yes.
I'm an ardent believer in freedom of speech. I think freedom of speech, unless you're saying, "Hey, I'm going to go fucking kill that guy," right? or you're inciting a genocide or something.
Well, here's the thing: it really is a difference between freedom of speech, but not necessarily freedom of, well, not assembly, rather freedom of planning. You know what I mean? Okay. You can say whatever you want, but you can't plan things with such specifics that you're about to carry a plan forward.
Let's not open up this can of worms, though, because it's a whole different...
A discussion for a different day.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that freedom of speech for me is, like, that's what you need for a functioning state, is unlimited freedom of speech. Sure. Now, some people, he brought up this very good point, shout out to Roman, is that... in the United States, what's the difference between viewing limits on their freedom of speech and limiting their freedom of access to guns? And I had to think about that because it's a good fucking point, right? Because to them, the purpose of this amendment is to ensure their liberty. Now, let's look at how gun ownership and militias have impacted liberty in the United States or allowed people to be more free. Has it really?
Well, let's take a look at it, shall we? Now, as far as the American Revolution, see, this is a topic that no doubt many of them are bringing up, that yes, indeed, militias, especially armed militias, did in fact guarantee the liberty of the United States. Thing is, it didn't.
George Washington hated fighting alongside militias, isn't that correct?
100% it did. He didn't trust them. He didn't care about them. More importantly, as far as he was concerned, these were a band of radical, albeit very fanatical, amateurs fighting beside a professional army, his professional army.
And when the militias said, "Yeah, I don't think we're gonna participate in this. I don't think we're gonna participate in this battle where you need our support," they just wouldn't do it, and it was the most frustrating thing in the world. Now, 1792 when a bill was passed requiring people to serve in a militia by law. Ineffective. 1794, the Pennsylvania Tax Rebellion. Failure of militias to suppress that. Federal government had to be called upon. Let's see. Yeah, 1812, again, as previously discussed. So I think this brings us back to another point that people ignore in the militia clause. It's not just about a defense from a tyrannical state. The militia argument was also about the defense of a just state. From rebellions, as we saw the tax farmer rebellion, from the invasion of, a foreign power, because not the Federalists, there was the Federalists and the
Loyalists?
No, we're talking about ratification of the Constitution. People were more in favor of states' rights. God damn it! Forgive me for the American listeners. We still ride on polar bears and live in igloos up here. Smoke a lot of weed too. So
I also dive headfirst into glaciers.
So yeah, basically the argument was not just that in place of a large federal army, that a militia also is for the defense of the state, right? Now, as we can see, the state doesn't really need militias today to, uphold its the sovereignty of its state, right, to protect the people, to suppress rebellions. Because if we look at a lot of the duties that a militia might have performed in this regard, let's take suppression of riots. The federal government had a very small army when the United States Constitution was ratified.
Yes.
Very small army that couldn't respond right away to, if it's in Virginia, it can't exactly go, to Ohio to suppress a rebellion there, or go down to Louisiana to fight the French. So these states' militias were necessary there for that very reason. Now, not the case. The arm of the federal government is a lot farther reaching. Or at the time of ratification of the Constitution, Spain and France still own most of the continental United States, with large portions in California that are just inhabited by native tribes, right? So in that context, militias make a lot more sense. Police forces as well, right? Police forces in the days of the early United States were largely the duty of sheriffs, local groups of people.
Marshals,
So a lot of times these positions were unpaid, right? They were just done out of civic duty. So in this context, militias start to make a little more sense.
In that context, yes, of course, especially when you're talking about the very inception of a country, that's for the most part seeing the world in a brand new light. They needed people performing this civic duty, arming themselves to the teeth, or at least their closest equivalent, and being able to patrol their own societies, their own towns, their own cities, whatever the case may have been. Yes, of course, this is required, this is necessary. But you have to, this is one of the very pinnacle opportunities, or rather one of the pinnacle examples, where one must take a step back, take a look at what was written then, and figure how it fits into your own society contemporarily to this day. This is something that cannot be done wholesale because it just doesn't work anymore. Logically, it doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, it's not going to protect the United States from the kinds of tyranny that they're facing today. Yeah. The kind of tyranny that we're facing isn't,
It's a far more insidious being than it was back then.
It's much more insidious. You're not going to meet this tyranny with fucking semi-automatic rifles. Yeah. The tyranny you're facing today are fucking lobby groups like the NRA and pharmaceutical companies pouring fucking money into political parties so that your policies are more or less uniform, whether you have Republican or Democrat. Pick this fucking corporatist party or the other. That's the kind of tyranny we're facing today,
And that is very much the case. And as much as I love using this argument, one long time ago, a friend of mine, or a rather colleague of mine, who was also at the time my roommate, we were having this discussion on gun ownership in the United States. And to him, it was exactly this: the means for the people to defend themselves against the tyrannical government, specifically their own, should it ever become tyrannical. And I brought that into the modern context, and I've realized that the United States armament and its military spending and its current military personnel that are still active today, numbers in the millions. So, to that extent, if the people need to defend themselves against the current United States government, against this tyranny, they have helicopters, and a wide variety of helicopters. Does that give every citizen in the United States the right to own Stinger missiles?
Yeah, that's honestly, would you even trust every citizen of the United States with that? And beyond quality of weapons, organization, tactics, military strategy, the United States have fucking perfected all of these things.
Very much so.
They're the pinnacle of the evolution of warfare, as far as we know it. They're the greatest power militarily, not just in absolute terms, but in relative terms. That's the world has ever seen. Grandpa's old hunting rifle isn't doing fucking shit.
Nope. Not against even the most basic combatants that the United States has.
Now, being up here in peaceful Canada, I'll tell you one thing: our ghettos look like your lower middle class neighborhoods in the United States. It's pretty fucking safe up here.
It is.
Now, that being said, admittedly, we don't understand the pressure of somebody who lives in Compton or South Jamaica, Queens, or some neighborhood like that where you are worried about your protection on a daily basis, right?
That's true.
In Canada, the protection argument's kind of null and void. So what would you say about that argument? That some people actually, in the United States, they do need to defend themselves. Why? Well, because they're being mugged or, assaulted on a daily basis, or they face that threat at least. Because that's real in a lot of places.
During the American Civil War, and I can't particularly pinpoint the exact date, In what is now considered, I suppose, mainland New York, the city, there was at one point ravaged by the local gang members that existed in that particular location.
Shout out to Daniel Day-Lewis.
Very much so. Great movie, Gangs of New York. Doing more research about it, the scene in the film in which Abraham Lincoln deploys his soldiers to quell every single violent gang member was absolutely true. He actually did do that. He sent his own soldiers, deviated them from their course to fight on the Southern Front, specifically to bring down these particular violent murderers who were causing havoc in what was otherwise their greatest city. Now, bringing that down to this point here, I do agree that the gangs, the amount of gun violence that exists in the United States is one of the most credible reasons to own weapons. But that, in and of itself, perpetuates the problem that already exists. You want to own a gun to defend yourself against people who will most definitely kill you if you're not yourself armed. But that's the problem already. You're just putting more wood on the fire. That's all it is.
Now, to propose a counterpoint, a lot of, and I agree with this argument, a lot of friends of mine who are gun owners would say registered gun owners aren't the problem by and large. They're a very small minority of those who commit gun violence. I agree with you. It's definitely not a solution to the problem of gang crime. But if you're an individual living in a rough neighborhood, it doesn't make a difference because we're not going to see a solution to poverty or, poor education or, gang violence anytime soon. So you as an individual need to do something in order to protect yourself.
Well, this is where I'm incapable of really making a rebuttal because I actually have no idea. I've never been forced in that situation where I needed to own a weapon for the security of my own being. So I couldn't tell you. With that being said, the problem isn't necessarily the security of your own being. That's not the problem. The problem starts from the very beginning, as you put it. The poverty, the unemployment, the lack of education. All of this is truly the problem here. None of this will be solved by just pouring weapons into the environment.
No, it won't. And that's the thing. It's not a solution. But at this point, I'd just like to say that our podcast is brought to you by some basic level of social welfare that allows us to live with decency and record this fucking podcast. maybe we wouldn't be having this conversation if that was the case in the United States. But
I refuse to believe that there aren't people who are out there just like us who have their own grievances and look as to the root cause of this problem. Unfortunately, many of these voices are very quickly silenced by the NRA and other government groups that seek to ensure that weapons are still held in the United States on a mass level.
It's voices like this that matter because I view a lot of politics in the United States as bought and fucking sold, right? There's headway you can make on some issues, but by and large, gun regulation is not going to happen.
No. Well, it could, but it really has some. I think there was. I can't particularly.
Sorry, I want to revise that. It's not that it's not going to happen. It's just that in some places, significant amount of gun reform is unlikely, right? In places with a big gun culture, but we have seen some reform. We have seen reform, so I'm gonna backtrack on that statement.
And I think some people, especially some lobbyists, who are definitely propagating against, or rather for, the high regulation for gun ownership. These people, they're fighting on a national level. They're fighting at the big Washington dogs, right there at the very tippity top. I think, as you put it, their fight shouldn't necessarily be from the top down. It should be from the bottom up.
Yeah.
They really need to start small. Start with a single city, then a state. Then, as the ladder continues to climb, you'll get all the way up to the national level.
Yeah,
but of course, this has to be
populist movements.
Yes, it has to be a process. And some could argue that they're already in the middle of the process. They're already going after the big national assemblies. But I think that's a much slower battle. That is a very steep hill to climb.
It's a slower battle, but a rewarding one. And if, again, I'm going to, as far as gun regulation, I'm going to say that mental health is the more important issue, though, here.
I suppose so.
I think it's the more important issue to get people behind. And we're starting to see a little bit of that, we're starting to see a little bit more awareness for mental health. But it's like, hey guys, mental health exists. Like, okay, cool, let's get some fucking money behind it. Like, let's get some people on the front lines of this battle. But I suppose awareness is the first step. But yeah.
Well, this is definitely a behemoth of a topic to discuss.
Yeah, we're only just scratching the surface today, to be honest with you. But it's definitely one we're going to, can, and will come back to in the future.
Absolutely. And with that, we'll be playing you out with Low Keys, Keep Your Hand on Your Gun.